Welcome to the Brightside podcast, where this week we are delving into the past. We'll try and sort the fact from the fiction with our legendary historical quiz, and then we'll solve some conspiracy theories in our bonus round. Speaking of historical legends, your host for this week is a man of many names. Some call him Matt, Matthew, David, or Dave. Who are you going by today?
You know, I often have problems of identity crisis, so I think I'm just going to leave that up to the other people on the podcast to decide what they want to call me.
So it will seem like we have about 20 people on the show this week, because every time you'll have a different name.
You get a dozen co-hosts for one. And alongside me today is Millie.
Both our degrees are in history, so technically this is the episode we're most qualified for. But I tried to tell someone the other day that humans had been around for 500,000 years. And so clearly 27 grand has been wasted on my education.
Hopefully our guest this week can save us. We've asked them to bring a historical figure that has either inspired or interested them. So you can introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Natasha, or Tasha, whichever one, doesn't really matter. I'm a PhD student in history, and I look at colonial Mexican history. So the figure that interests me most is a woman that we know as Marina. It's the name that the Spanish gave her when they arrived in Mexico. We don't know her real name, but she was the interpreter for the Spanish when they came to Mexico in 1519. She's been somewhat of a controversial figure because the main historical narrative has really painted her as a traitor, someone who delivered her people into the hands of the Spanish. But there's been some more recent work which has really reassessed her, talking more about the fact that when she came to the Spanish, it was as a slave, and she was able to use the fact that she was multilingual to negotiate a better position for herself in what would otherwise have been really a very grim situation, looking as well at the fact that her place of origin was thousands of miles from central Mexico, which was eventually conquered. So saying she was a traitor sort of assumes these were her people who were conquered. They were not. She didn't really have any relation to that part of the country. But I find her particularly interesting as a figure in gender history, a figure in Indigenous history, and she was the subject of my first sort of history essay that I really enjoyed and sort of got me into thinking about doing it some more.
My dissertation was also on Indigenous history of Aboriginal people, and I found it really interesting how this kind of history from below, we're only really finding out about it in the last few decades, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. In terms of Mexican Indigenous history, because that's what I know about most, from the 1970s, sort of 1980s onwards, before that, there's really no kind of history that looks at Indigenous viewpoints or works with Indigenous languages.
Okay. I'm Emily Duckett, and I have a degree in English and history. And the historical person I find interesting at the moment is Thomas Cromwell, because I've been reading Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series and I am obsessed.
I just find him fascinating and really manipulative and great.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm currently doing my undergrad in ancient history. My favourite historical figure literally changes every single day. But right now I've been doing a lot of research on women as sexual figures in antiquity, and I've really enjoyed researching a female philosopher called Hipparchia. She's a female cynic, and she's very interesting because she basically took everything that was deemed normal in society and was like, I don't want to do that though. So she didn't. And there's loads of stories of basically her and her husband, who was double her age by choice, wild for antiquity, and just having a lot of public sex everywhere.
So is that what you were going to do your dissertation on?
I'm actually doing my dissertation on Cassandra from the Iliad. She was I can't pronounce this, prophetess. And basically she was a priestess of Apollo. I'm well shady, but basically she was cursed she was able to see the future, but whenever she told what she saw, she wouldn't be believed and everyone thought she was a crazy person. And then the things that she said would come true and everyone would be like, why weren't we warned about this? You were. So I kind of want to look at her original depictions in Iliad and, you know, what she said and how everyone reacted to what she said and how she was portrayed, and then kind of look at those depictions in drama, like the early modern period. So looking at her depictions in Shakespeare and medieval plays and stuff like that.
You're now making me realise that my knowledge of ancient history is much weaker than it should be.
Yeah, I'm just nodding along like, yeah, of course.
I mean, that's me with basically everything that has been said thus far. My knowledge comes to like a dead stop at around 400 AD.
Really?
You see, I work on the theory that history doesn't begin until the end of the English Civil Wars and ends at the end of the Victorian era.
I feel
Because
like
those are the only parts that I know anything about.
that's a bit of a flawed theory anyway.
Whereas my history goes from the lower Paleolithic, so like dinosaurs. Like ancient history goes a bit muddy after about 400 AD because it's when the Roman Empire splits into East and West, and I kind of just go, I can't really be bothered anymore.
I'm so glad you know about ancient history though, because me and Matthew were both going, we don't know about it. We need someone who can be the expert on this.
I really wouldn't rely on me that much.
Yeah, let's move on to a history that I actually understand. Georgia, who have you picked for your thing? I'm hoping it's someone modern.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Georgia and I'm currently doing my undergrad in modern history. I'm currently looking at the experiences of German Jewish refugees fleeing Europe in sort of the interwar years between 1938 and 41. So my figure is a guy called Julius Caesar, and he was a Japanese diplomat who was in the consulate in Kaunas in Lithuania. And I don't remember, like, within the early 40s, he issued about 6,000 visas to Jewish refugees who were planning to leave Lithuania in that area so they could escape. And apparently when he was leaving Lithuania, when the consulate in Kaunas shut down, he was throwing visas on the trains to people who had come.
I was just thinking what Georgia said was sort of especially interesting. I don't know if at the time were Germany and Japan allies yet?
So 1941, this was just before Pearl Harbor and before Germany declared war on the US and Japan joining in. But basically, Japan, in regards to refugees, was a bit apathetic, so it was a lot easier.
Nice. All of you have gone for such obscure figures. When I tried to think of who my favourite inspirational figure was, I could only think of animals because I couldn't find a human I liked enough.
Animals are the only good humans.
I was looking at Coco the gorilla, but in the end I went for the next best thing and decided Jane Goodall was one of my favourite people. She's an English primatologist and anthropologist, and for those who don't know, she did detailed observations of Tanzanian apes and basically revolutionised our knowledge of chimpanzee behaviour, and was essentially one of the first people to prove they had emotions, because before then people treated animals very differently.
Yeah, so for my one, I also haven't really picked a person. I thought about the idea of picking one person to stick out from history, and I thought it kind of serves our whole idea of great man history. I didn't really like individuals as such. So the person I've picked is Ted Johns, and he doesn't matter as a person in this story. I'm not going to explain who he was really. He was, so the place where I'm from in London is called the Isle of Dogs, which is also where that Wes Anderson movie gets its name from. It's an island 2 miles east of the city of London, and it was historically very underdeveloped. We didn't get an underground station until 1999. Transport links to the rest of London were very poor. There's only 2 bridges, and there was only 1 bus which ran in frequently. And most of the council estates were really poorly maintained. All of the public services were just forgotten about by the local government. So in 1970, he declared independence for 2 weeks, where the Isle of Dogs ran as an independent republic from the UK. He had press from all over the world, and his Declaration of Independence made quite a bit of news, especially I've seen news articles in America of this island nation. Well, basically what he did was he blocked the bridges and didn't let anyone come on or off the island, and said that he was going to continue that until the government provided proper services to the people of the island.
So he was throwing a really big political tantrum.
Yes, he was throwing a big political tantrum. And it's interesting because a lot of the people on the island didn't support the Declaration of Independence, but it didn't matter because after about 2 weeks, the government came in and they promised that they would spend more money on the island. And eventually, it's how you got the development in the 1980s of Canary Wharf, which is the big financial centre, one of the central business districts of London, and the whole island was redeveloped. However, there's some ambiguity here, because it's not necessarily a good thing, because none of the people who are living on the island, who are called islanders, they didn't really benefit from it, because the whole place was gentrified and they were all pushed out to Essex. So now you've just got a bunch of rich people who have moved in and made the place prettier. You haven't really made the place any better for the local people.
That was a roller coaster.
That's my interesting point.
Things like that always remind me how little I actually know about British history.
Me too.
Like when I actually think about it, I'm like, I can tell you bare about the Mediterranean. Can't really tell you a lot about England after about the Roman time.
Completely differently there. I feel like in schools you get absolutely stuffed with British history. I can't even count the number of times you have to do the Treaty of Versailles, the First World War, the Second World War. Nothing about British Empire, though. Of course, we don't want to get into that, and preferably as little as possible about other parts of the world.
Oh yeah, as we focus on indigenous populations, all our work is just saying colonialism was the worst.
Okay, so the problem I have with British history is that it's a lot of it's pumped into us at schools. We get a lot of the Second World War and the First World War, but we miss out on some very important things. Like, I know a lot of people who have never heard of the Glorious Revolution, which I think is a major point.
Can you outline what the Glorious Revolution was?
Okay, so after the Civil Wars, I think it was King Charles II, he died, and then his brother came onto the throne, and his brother was a secret Catholic, and a lot of people knew that he was Catholic, but it was okay because he had two Protestant daughters who would inherit the throne after he died, until he had a son who, there was a conspiracy theory at the time, which is foreshadowing for our later conspiracy theory chat. A big conspiracy at the time was that actually this wasn't his child, and it was just some baby that had been smuggled into the bedroom in a warming pan. So it was known by some people at the time as the warming pan baby. And so they believed this child was illegitimate, but really it was just an excuse because they didn't want a Catholic monarch again, because the nobility had mostly turned into Protestants and they wanted to keep the country that way. As a way to get rid of him and to stop the monarchy becoming Catholic, they invited over William of Orange, who became William III of Great Britain, to rule as co-monarch with his wife Mary, who was the king's daughter, one of the Protestant ones. Yeah, and then he signed into law the Bill of Rights, which is the foundation for the modern British government and all of our system of laws, really.
See, that's interesting. I feel like at schools, they do teach a lot of British history, but they either don't choose the interesting parts or they write about it in a really boring way. Like, Emily, you mentioned, who was it again, as your inspirational figure?
Thomas Cromwell.
Did you get that from the Hilary Mantel books?
Yes.
See, I think she's done a really great job, and so have a lot of modern historical novelists, at making history actually interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And also interesting about Thomas Cromwell is that, well, we see these kind of figures throughout history, like these people who are at the right hand of the king or the person in power who is actually running everything. And you can see that now even in like Dominic Cummings. I'd say he's probably our modern day Thomas Cromwell and is pulling the strings for someone else yet again. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, in the Brexit campaign.
And Dominic Cummings now writes Boris Johnson's speeches, so he's responsible for a lot more, I think.
I mean, after I did my GCSEs, honest to God, I was like, I'm kind of sick of hearing about the same two wars and whatever. That's why I personally chose to go down the ancient history route, especially after my GCSE in Latin. And also the thing with ancient history, which is kind of what we've been talking about, is that it is a lot more morally ambiguous. There are a lot more grey areas in ancient history. I don't think anyone could for sure say whether the Romans were, the Roman Empire was good or bad for the people they conquered. They conquered Greece, they conquered a lot of the Mediterranean, and, a lot of the main kind of arguments is about whether Romanization was a good thing for them, making them seemingly more civilized to a Western perspective rather than this kind of barbarian cult. Even with the Greeks, the Greeks had a lot of infighting And so it's kind of like you couldn't ever say whether one party was in the right or the wrong. Like probably the most famous example is the Peloponnesian War, Sparta and Athens. I'm picking examples I'm hoping people have kind of heard of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Rather than going like really obscure. So it can't really say for certain, especially in comparison to an example like World War II, where you could clearly see the Nazis were in the wrong. Like, so it's kind of interesting, especially when you come to issues about slavery. You know, everyone had a slave in the ancient world, unless you yourself was a slave.
One thing that you said, Chloe, that made me think about the moral ambiguity, made me think of Julius Caesar, because on the one hand, obviously my examples are very limited compared to yours. I know the one guy that everyone's heard of, but Julius Caesar, on the one hand, fed the poor of Rome by increasing the grain dole or reducing the threshold you needed, how poor you needed to be to get the grain dole, so more people could have access to plentiful food. However, on the other hand, on his campaigns in Gaul, he committed genocide several times. He wiped out several tribes of people by killing all of the men and selling all of the women and children into slavery. So we don't remember those genocides quite as much. Time heals everything, you know.
The amount of confidence it would take to name a month after yourself.
Well, that wasn't actually that uncommon. The kind of the reformations of the calendar were quite common. Like a lot of people tried to change them because like the calendar was actually really weird. They only had 3 dates on the calendar. So they remembered the 1st of each month. They remembered the 13th, kind of like the Ides, and then they remembered another day that I can't remember. And basically all the other days were just remembered by whether you could work or not on that day. And but with Julius Caesar especially, like it was a really big thing within this time period from about through Augustus as well. So probably like the 1st century BC, it was a really big thing to kind of get the populace on your side. And with Julius Caesar and his political kind of friends, adversaries like Pompey the Great, recognition, buzzing. It was kind of like a battle of who could get the people on their side. And Julius Caesar, during his campaigns, all of the treasure he took from the Gauls, he actually sent back to Rome. He didn't actually keep a lot of it. So where he'd send a letter detailing what he'd done and all of this treasure, and he'd basically command people to throw it. If you caught it, that was great. And so when he became dictator, everyone kind of portrays this as kind of like, oh, he was killed straight away, everyone hated him. But in reality, 44 BC was kind of like a breaking point, I think, and that was only for a very small minority of people. In reality, the populace loved him. They didn't really care. What he did is he'd make himself like dictator in intervals. So a dictator wasn't really what we know as today. A dictator was more like somebody who would come in crises and would fix things and then they'd step away. And so he'd make himself dictator for 6 months, then a year, then 2 years, then 5 years. And then in 44 BC, he made himself dictator for life, which for the Roman people was a bit too close to the idea of being a king. They hated the idea of kings. They hated the idea of one person in charge, and which is why the Roman Republic became such a big thing. And then they kind of knocked him off. And then they made Octavian/Augustus in charge, who became the first Roman emperor. We love the Romans.
Yeah, I was just thinking what you were saying about, I didn't know about, you know, the Romans really not wanting to have kings, but it's interesting because Rome and particularly sort of military tactics of government are really, really fundamental in how people in medieval Europe going into early modern Europe think about kingship and what a good king should do. They very much draw from Roman authors and sort of Roman ideals of governorship, which is, it's curious because obviously the Romans did not want a king.
No. All of this reminds me of, has everyone seen the YouTube video, The Entire History of the World, I Guess, by Bill Wirtz? I fully recommend watching it. I think it's about under 20 minutes, but he covers pretty much everything that has ever happened and how everything interweaves and impacts on other things, how religions are started.
You could make a religion out of this. Don't.
It's such a good video. And when I watched it, I just thought, I don't need to pay for my degree. I could have just watched this and be done with it. But you know what? I know how to footnote now like a pro, so.
Yeah, and now you've got a really fancy piece of paper.
So now we're moving on to our next segment, the Inspiration Station, where we're going to talk about inspirational news stories to do with history. Now, this is the hardest episode to do this for because the thing about history is it tends to be in the past. So there's not many news stories unless you have archaeologists discovering something new. Does anyone want to talk about any new discoveries that might have happened?
Yeah, I actually didn't find this myself. My boyfriend found this, and my boyfriend does physics.
He's not one of us.
He's not. He's really not. But basically, he sent me this news article, and I was like, I swear to God, if this is another cat picture. But it was a news article, and basically, these group of people have apparently claimed to find a Roman emperor's ring. It's made of like some special sapphire. Oh, found it! I found it! I found the news article. Yeah, so they claim to find this like sapphire ring, and they thought it had been worn by Caligula. Caligula is the one that's known for waging a war on Poseidon. I don't know whether you've seen the Horrible History sketch, but he threw a bunch of horses into the sea to fight Poseidon, and they all died because you can't fight a war against Poseidon in the sea, they drown. But yeah, they found that it was found in the second half of the 18th century, and basically somebody has put this up for sale, and so if you have enough money you can buy Caligula's ring.
How much do you think it would cost, does the article say?
It doesn't say, but my best guess is a lot. It's not going to cost you £1.
Not going to be cheap. I remember, this reminds me of an article when they discovered the skeleton of a new dinosaur and they were auctioning off the right to name it. So you could have a dinosaur named after yourself. And I think it was going for about 20 million, either pounds or dollars. Does anyone else have any inspirational news stories, or shall we move on?
I'm not sure how much we could talk about this in detail, but from a Financial Times opinion article published on the 8th of May, actually, is that Ida Wells, a famous journalist in the US, who over 100 years ago first brought up the prominence of the problem of lynching and how that was a bad thing, finally won a Pulitzer Prize 89 years after her death.
Oh, that's very inspiring. I love when people get recognition, even if it's late, it's better than never. Like there was a really good film called Hidden Figures, which was about the African-American women who worked on the NASA space program. And it was amazing. And at the premiere, one of the women is still alive and went along, and just a really well-written and directed film anyway, so everyone should watch it. And now we've got the star of the podcast, the quiz. So essentially the way this works is you guys will be a team and you'll be competing against teams from other podcasts. And at the end, the team with the most points will win a prize. So we'll have the main section of the quiz, and then we'll also have a bonus round where you can win 3 extra points. And in that bonus round, you'll be trying to find conspiracy fact from fiction. And another thing to note about this quiz is that one of the questions, all the answers will either be right or wrong. So there'll just be one question like that.
One of the questions is a trick.
And we've also asked you to come up with a team name.
I vote for the Daves in honour of the man we now know as David.
It sounds like he's dead when you say it like that.
What does it actually say on your birth certificate?
On my birth certificate, David Matthew Harper.
There we go. The Daves.
Then your name's David.
I vote strongly against the Daves.
I think it should be something historically based.
This is where there's a long silence where we all...
Millie, you've got to cut this part out.
Yeah, please.
I'm just thinking about
please.
Chloe's news story. It could be Caligula's ring.
I think we should be Caligula's cavalry, because we're all going to drown anyway.
I was going to suggest the Plague Doctors, because it feels
Oh,
quite
I like
on
that.
topic.
I quite like that.
You'll be bad guys, though.
The Plague Doctors were helpful.
They
just
were trying
really
to
know what they
help.
were doing.
What was your dissertation on again, Emily?
It was on women on the Manor of Wakefield during the Black Death and how it impacted them.
And how did it impact them?
Well, a lot more men died during the Black Death, not just in Wakefield. And that meant that women who didn't want to get married after the Black Death could be like, now I don't have to because there's not enough men for every woman to marry. And then women who did want to could advance themselves further because there were more like eligible bachelors to choose from. So it was a good thing. And then lots of women started their own businesses and happy times.
Oh, that's quite a wholesome take on the Black Death. So you decided to be the plague doctors. Let's hope in the quiz you do better than the plague doctors actually did during the plague. So, Matthew, do you want to kick it off with the first question?
Okay, so the first question is, which of the following is based on a real pirate? Captain Morgan, Captain Crunch, or Captain Hook?
It's got to be Captain Morgan, right? Because he really looks like Blackbeard.
I think this is the trick question. I think all of them are wrong.
All of them are wrong.
Things they use for brands are made up, like Aunt Bessie isn't real, so
What?
maybe none of these people are real.
Don't you dare
Sorry
tell
to
me Uncle
offend
Ben's
that.
not real.
But if you were going to name yourself a pirate, definitely wouldn't be Captain Crunch, unless it's Cruncher of Bones. But so I think this is the trick question.
So is that going to be your final answer then?
What do we think, guys?
Oh, I'm scared. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go with
do
that.
it. Let's go for the trick question.
Okay, you're wrong. It's Captain Morgan.
Oh!
Captain,
So obvious!
Captain Morgan was a Welsh privateer who raided Spanish colonies in and around the Caribbean. With the money he liberated from the Spanish, he purchased 3 large sugar plantations on the island of Jamaica before being knighted and serving 3 times as lieutenant governor of the colony. Captain Crunch, according to crunchfacts.com, his full name is Horatio Magellan Crunch, and he has a
Horatio?
perfect IQ score.
I'm sorry, I think you should not trust the person who only knows pre-400 AD with questions that seem a bit more modern.
In an interesting connection to Leicester, Leicester City captain and centre-back Wes Morgan agreed a sponsorship with Captain Morgan's rum, where they made 11,000 bottles of limited edition rum, which were produced and sold out within 24 hours. The contract for this promotion also stated that Wes Morgan would have to attend any fancy dress parties as the character of Captain Morgan, and that whenever he entered a bar, he would have to shout, "There's only one Captain Morgan," before buying every adult a Captain Morgan and cola. Of this contract was that if any patrons at the bar who he was supposed to buy drinks for seemed like they'd had too much alcohol, he would have to tell them that only anchors go overboard. Please drink responsibly before giving them some water.
Oh, that's the best thing ever. What we should take away from the story of Captain Morgan is when life gives you lemons, don't buy slave plantations with them.
I thought you were going to go down the scurvy route, but I respect the slave plantation route, I guess.
Before we end up too deep into slavery, I'll move on to the next question.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So, next question. What did Pope Gregory IX declare war on in 1232? Fatimid Caliphate, moral decay and sin, or cats?
Kind of want it to be moral decay, but also I want it to be cats more.
I thought you liked cats, Tash.
Not since I saw the film.
It must be moral
Hard
decay
me.
and sin.
What was the
surely.
first one? The first option?
The Fatimid Caliphate.
That's
I don't know
really
what that
early.
is.
That's early Islam. So they were kind of like the first clan to adopt Islam as like the main thing for the Arabian Empire.
So I feel that's got to be earlier than 1230.
Yeah, no,
Because you've got the first Crusades in
Yeah.
the
That's a good
1090s.
point.
yeah, I don't think it's them. I think I'd like to think it's moral decay and sin, but somehow I don't know which route the Pope's gonna go down. So I'm gonna bow out of this one, guys. You can.
I'm guessing like back in the medieval period that cats weren't viewed too goodly because of superstition and that.
Yeah, they thought they were
Okay.
witches' familiars and that kind of thing.
Okay, cats.
Yeah, let's try
Yeah.
cats.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're right. Cats were
Ooh.
persecuted during 1238. So basically, cats were brought over to Europe from Egypt by the Romans. And for a while, they lived fine. Cats chased mice, which was helpful because it prevented the spread of disease. But then in the early 1230s, Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull which declared cats to be the instruments of Satan and created a great medieval cat purge, and especially black cats who they believed were especially linked to Lucifer.
So our next question is, what happened to Walt Disney after his death? Was he cryogenically frozen? Was he cremated? Or do we not know what happened to him?
He wasn't cryogenically frozen. That's a myth.
Wait, you mean he's not frozen underneath Disneyland waiting to be revived?
No, that's
what
an
I
urban
thought
legend.
happened.
I don't think we actually know what happened to him, do we? Like, I feel as if cremation seems quite obvious. But
Yeah,
like,
like,
I don't, we don't
Keep
know.
the mystery.
like, I don't think his family would have publicized what happened to him. Like, if people knew he was like buried or cremated, then there wouldn't be a rumor going around that he was cryogenically frozen.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of pressure from the first question to not lead you down a wrong path. So
I think you might be right, though. I mean, why would everyone be going that he was frozen at Disneyland if it's public knowledge that he was cremated?
Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, so is that your final answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's wrong again. He was cremated.
this is what I mean. Stop listening to me, please.
His remains were cremated 2 days after his death. However, the conspiracy theory that you've mentioned in your thing has come about that he was cryogenically frozen, both because he was big into his futuristic technology like Epcot and the whole getting permission for nuclear power stations in Disneyland so he could run it like a proper city, but also because certain television programs, and now I'm going to call one out in particular here, iCarly has an episode where they say that Walt Disney is cryogenically frozen.
Whoa. We
underneath
cannot
the
be
Walt Disney
blaming
Studios.
iCarly for this myth. I think it started before that.
The conspiracy theory goes on to say that, you know, the movie Frozen? It wasn't created because it was a good idea or because they wanted to adapt some more of Hans Christian Andersen's work, but because they wanted to hide the search term Disney Frozen from truth seekers.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what I'm learning throughout this quiz process is stop listening to me.
I bet you're going to get the next one correct now.
If it's an ancient history question, then and I get it wrong, I might get kicked off my degree.
I am sorry to disappoint you. The next question is, what was special about the 7th US President Andrew Jackson's pet? Was it he was removed from his funeral for vulgar behaviour? Did Jackson teach him to cheat in prize fights? Or would this pet urinate on command after hearing the name of one of Jackson's political enemies, John Quincy Adams?
I mean, Jackson was a horrible genocidal maniac, so the last thing kind of sounds like something he'd get a kick out of.
He was a lunatic. I think the White House tends to attract those kinds of people.
But also, I feel like if the pet was a dog, you don't want a dog humping at someone's leg at a funeral.
Presidents had weird pets. There's a whole Wikipedia page where you can go through what each president kept as a pet, and there's like leopards, elephants, like all kinds.
Yeah, like I feel as if I remember seeing this guy had a really weird pet.
I don't know if that makes any difference though to what the pet will be doing.
What kind of pet do you think it was? Maybe you can work it out from that.
I don't know, some kind of big cat. I think it could be the urinate one, like Tasha says.
I mean, none of it makes him look good, does it?
No.
So are you going to go with the urination one?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm afraid the right answer was actually it was removed from his funeral due to vulgar behaviour.
Oh, what did it do? No. And what was it? What was the pet?
Yeah, what was it? That's my main question.
Well, this might have helped. It was a parrot.
What?
So the parrot, basically, during the funeral, thousands of people went, and while the sermon was being given, the parrot started eliciting quite a few swear words, and people thought this was disrespectful, so had to remove the parrot.
President Jackson spent a lot of time teaching his parrot how to swear at people because he thought it was very funny.
And it probably was.
It would brighten up an otherwise quite sad day for his family, I'm sure. Yeah, there was a historical pet that was taught to urinate upon hearing the name of a political enemy, but it was during the English Civil Wars. I think it was one of Charles's generals taught King Charles Spaniel how to pee when he heard the name of Fairfax?
Can we have something that I might not get wrong, please?
Unfortunately, the next question is another modern history, relatively modern history question. Which of the following happened first? David Lloyd George became the first, and so far only, Welsh-speaking Prime Minister of the UK. Clarence Birdseye invented the process for commercial frozen food, or the first woman was elected to Congress.
Oh, damn.
David Lloyd George would have been the 1910s.
Yeah, that's the only one that I
think it was
know.
the chicken, you know?
I mean, I'm pretty sure the first woman elected to Congress was like really recent as well. Like, I feel as if that was like in the 80s.
I mean, Lloyd George, I think, was elected in 1908, but I don't know about the frozen peas. I feel like that's something that would happen in the 20s or the 30s, but I
I
have no
don't
idea.
know. Didn't
I mean,
what's he called? The famous captain who like, oh, what's his name?
Captain Birdseye?
No. There's a guy, and he went over to America, and then he invented frozen chicken.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't want to help you.
God damn it!
And I'd
I
like
know
to
who I'm
remind you
talking
that I
about.
said commercial frozen food.
I know, but I'm just thinking that frozen
Also.
chicken was invented back then, so maybe it's not as late as you think it would be.
You can't commercialise frozen peas unless a lot of people have fridges, right?
yeah, which
True.
I think would have been later. I feel as if that would have been like the 40s, 50s.
Yeah,
Should we go for David Lloyd George then?
yeah, David Lloyd George, that's what my gut is saying.
Okay, so that's your final answer, David Lloyd George?
I hate it when you say that. Stop saying that because it makes me want to doubt.
I feel like women couldn't vote in the US like before 1908, so it can't be that, can it?
Yeah,
Like,
it
if not, let's
definitely
not be elected to Congress.
It definitely won't be elected to Congress.
Okay, so the Welsh then. Okay, so it's wrong because the first woman elected to Congress happened in 1916.
What? No
The
way.
So are you telling me that a woman was in Congress before they could vote?
A woman was elected to Congress before women were allowed to vote.
Really?
Jeanette Rankin was elected to the House of Representatives for the Republican Party in Minnesota in 1916.
The Republicans elected a woman to Congress.
Yeah, because basically, the switch between the two parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, did not occur until Roosevelt became elected in the 1930s. So the Republicans were more progressive than the Democrats during that time.
Well, anyway, Jeanette Rankin was elected to the House in 1916 for one term, and then she came back and was elected again in 1940. Yeah, so she only served 2 terms in Congress from 1916 to 1918 and then 1940 to 1942. And both times happened during a declaration of war, and she's the only person to have voted against both declarations of war. And in 1941, she was the only member of either the House of Representatives or the Senate to vote against declaring war on Japan.
My knowledge of history right now is really like...
We're moving on to like a silly one, which hopefully should be a bit more easy to guess. What was a common Victorian slang for sausages? Was it bags of mystery, damfinos, or bow wow mutton?
I really want it to be bow wow. I really want it to be that, but the chances of it being that are like a third, so...
Well, that's literally the chances.
That's the case for every
Is that how
question.
multiple choice works?
What was the second one again?
The second one was damfinos.
How's it spelt?
Damfinos.
Damn, Finos. Maybe sausages were bags of mystery because you didn't know what meat you were getting.
Yeah, or what part of the meat you were getting.
Yeah, like I feel as if like butchers would get rid of all of like their cheap rotty meat by putting it in sausages. So you wouldn't know what you were getting. So they were bags of mystery.
Yeah. I reckon sausages used to be mostly organs and feet and all the other bits.
Yeah.
I mean, has that changed?
No.
Do you know what? I'm gonna stake my claim. I'm gonna try and redeem myself.
Yeah, I'm not that inclined to listen to Chloe.
No, guys, I feel as if this is on Horrible Histories.
But it does sound like the kind of thing that would be on Horrible Histories.
Yeah.
So I want you to trust me. I want you to put your faith in me, this one. And if I'm wrong, I will not speak for the rest of the podcast.
Okay, let's go for it.
Bags of Mystery is the right answer. So Chloe has redeemed herself.
And you all thought I was stupid. Joke's on you, I am.
And it's for exactly the reason you said, it was Bags of Mystery, because no one was quite sure what went into them. The true golden era of English slang was the Victorian era in London, because the Industrial Revolution meant that suddenly millions of people were converging on one place, whereas before often people would be born, raised, work and die in one village, whereas now we had people from all parts of the country just mixing together and inventing new slang, new language. I think the population of London increased by about 260% during this time.
We should go back to those days where everyone stayed where they came from.
I'm not sure that's the message we want to put out.
Okay, so the next question is, what did Henry VIII put a tax on in 1535? Not practicing archery, facial hair, or windows?
I think it's not practicing archery because historically the English have real trouble with longbows. You had to train with them a lot. There was definitely a law earlier on that said every man who has leisure time is supposed to use it to practice archery.
Yeah, I feel as if there was like a law where you had to fire a certain amount of arrows a day. It's definitely not windows because that was during the Georgian time period.
Yeah, I was going to say the window tax is a thing, but I don't know if this is the right period for it.
I also think it's archery. I mean, with facial hair, I feel as if that's
everyone had facial hair, didn't they? I mean, what were you supposed to shave with?
Yeah, I feel as if that wasn't such a big deal. Whereas, like Tasha said, I think we had a real problem in like battles and wars where we just kind of get killed by some archers.
Because apparently it would take years and years and years of training to be able to use a longbow properly. And I know a lot of longbows were found on the Mary Rose that went down while Henry VIII was king.
I kind of want to trust Tasha on this one.
Yeah. Let's trust Tasha.
Yeah,
and if you're wrong, you will
feel
the pain
right
you will feel the pain of I felt every time I let us down the wrong path.
You just want to drag someone down with you, Chloe.
So you're going with archery then?
Archery.
Okay, Chloe, you've successfully managed to drag someone down with you because it was facial hair.
No way!
For exactly the reason that you stated as a reason why you wouldn't. Because everyone had facial hair, and so everyone would have to pay the tax. It was a good way to raise a lot of money.
That's so sneaky.
Yeah, you're correct about the windows. They were taxed later on in the Georgian period, and it led to a lot of rich people, bricking up their windows.
Yeah, you can see it now.
Yeah, and also the archery one, you're completely right about it being a law. It's earlier than the Tudor period, really, but like I think it's still technically a law that every man over the age of 14 has to spend 2 hours a week.
1300s that it was made, wasn't it?
Now I'm supposed to be practicing archery 2 hours a week.
Why aren't you?
Did you know that it's still a law that in York you can kill a Scottish man on a Sunday with a bow and arrow?
Yes.
Oh.
Wait, don't, because my dad's Scottish.
Well,
I heard a rumour that's quite similar about Chester, that you're allowed to shoot a Welshman from the ramparts of the city if you see him walking around.
Yes, I know that law. It specifically says that Welshmen aren't allowed to arrive before dawn and have to leave by dusk. Otherwise, you're allowed to shoot them with a bow and arrow.
Oh my.
Incredible.
Got to keep the Welsh at bay somehow.
Okay, well, I'm terrified now, but let's move on to the next question. So, Roman Emperor Gaius, also known as Caligula, assigned who as a senator? Was it his ex-wife, his 100-year-old grandfather, or his favourite horse?
It was his favourite horse.
Yeah, it was the horse, wasn't it?
They said it was a bit of a joke at this point. It wasn't his ex-wife because he killed her. And and people didn't really live to 100. And his grandfather would have been a previous Roman Empire who too would have been killed.
That is very sound reasoning, and you got the right answer.
Yay.
So the horse was called, I probably won't pronounce this right, it was called Incitatus, and basically Caligula loved him. He made him a marble stool, an ivory manger, gave him a jeweled collar, and it was even said that servants had to feed this horse oats mixed with gold. So it was a very lucky horse. It's debatable, because it was so long ago, whether he did actually elect him as a senator or whether he said he elected him as a senator. And
the sources at that time were very hostile towards Caligula, as I'm sure you could probably imagine, because he was a bit of a shit guy. So we don't really know whether he waged war on the sea. We don't really know about all of this stuff, or whether it was literally just people making fun of him, because like they were showing off how rich they are, which the Romans really didn't like. They preferred people who were more kind of Augustus types, to people that would wear rags and would say that they are a part of the people, even though they're so above them.
He was partly treating this horse so well to basically insult and humiliate his senators by saying a horse could do what you do and your work
your
is
job isn't
meaningless.
important. You're a complete rubber stamp, and I'm going to appoint a horse to do your work for you, because that's what you do.
That counts as ancient history, right? We got one in for you, Chloe.
Caligula, Roman Empire, is in fact ancient history. Good job.
And we're never going to speak of ancient history again.
Yeah, I really don't know. I feel really bad because a lot of everything I say is mostly accompanied by a really weird facial expression, and I feel as if people are missing out on that.
At least you're mentioning it now, so they'll know to laugh just whenever you speak from now on.
Exactly. I am the epitome of comedic genius.
Okay, so our next question is, who was offered the position of President of Israel in 1952? Was it Albert Einstein, James Roosevelt, or Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis?
It was Albert Einstein.
I mean, because it's got to be someone Jewish.
That was very
right?
confident.
Yeah, I remember reading it somewhere. It was Albert Einstein, but then he turned it down.
I feel confident in George's ability.
I think so too.
Okay, well, that one's correct. He was offered it in 1952 after the first president of Israel died. He turned it down because he said he had no head for that sort of problems. The Associate Justice of the Supreme Court that I mentioned, he was the first Jewish person to be appointed to the Supreme Court. He was appointed by Woodrow Wilson, actually, which is an interesting turn. He was very progressive. He's thought of as one of the best Supreme Court justices because of his stances on freedom of privacy, mostly. He also graduated from Harvard Law School with reportedly the best score anyone's ever gotten in their exams.
Whoa.
Wow.
Let's move on. Who invented the first light bulb? Was it Warren de la Rue, Thomas Edison, or Marco Pierre?
I just remember it wasn't Edison, because he had a reputation for like patenting other people's ideas. I think Edison was the first person to patent it.
I want to say it's this Pierre guy.
It might not be like a good light bulb, you know what I mean? Like it might be
like a really bad light bulb.
There's a film about this whole like Tesla Edison.
And what if this is the question where all the answers are wrong?
Oh, it might be.
It could actually be Tesla.
Yeah.
I really think it was Tesla that made the light bulb.
Oh, I'm scared though, because we got it wrong last time.
Well, we've got a lot of questions wrong, to be fair.
Yeah,
I doubt we're winning. We've got about 3 questions right.
Right.
I'm going to say this is the trick question.
Is that your final answer?
Somebody else.
Yeah, that's final answer.
It's the trick question. Go for it. Go on.
I'm afraid that's not the answer I have.
Was it Pierre? Was it the Pierre guy?
No, it wasn't actually. So this is a bit of a complicated backstory. So the idea for actually creating light from electricity invented about 200 years ago by Humphrey Davy, and he showed how electric currents could flow through wires and heat up to a point where they gave out light. However,
sorry to interrupt, Millie, but Humphrey Davy. So my favourite place in the world is the National Coal Mining Museum, and Humphrey Davy invented the Davey Lamp, which was a massive piece of technology for the coal miners. And the first place I will be going when all this is over is back to the Coal Mining Museum, and I highly recommend you all go.
I love the Coal Mining Museum.
It's amazing, and it's free.
I hold the Coal Mining Museum in the same regard I hold the National Railway Museum.
I don't hold the Railway Museum in the same regard, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the main problem for Humphrey Davy was that you had to find a cheap material that burned brightly and lasted for many hours, because most materials weren't durable enough. And while Thomas Edison is often credited with creating the first solution in 1879 with the carbon filament light bulb, actually British chemist Warren de la Rue solved this challenge about 40 years earlier, and he used a type of platinum. However, the problem was it wasn't economic. So although scientifically he created the first light bulb, it wasn't one that could be distributed widely.
Moving on, Oliver Cromwell. Which of the following did he ban during his leadership? Theatre, the celebration of Christmas, or makeup?
All three.
I feel like he banned
Yeah,
all of them,
all
didn't he?
Yeah, I've watched Horrible Histories. He banned all three.
Yeah.
Is it going to be third time lucky?
I think it might be. I really have strength in this one. Did you also know that Oliver Cromwell was the great-great-nephew of Thomas Cromwell?
Duh shit.
Oh wow.
Okay, so you're going to go with all of them. That's correct. He liked to ban things.
Woo!
Well, what was he called? A prudent?
Puritan.
Puritan, that's the word.
Well, I mean, he kind of was a bit of a prude as well.
Definitely.
Ooh, the next question is my favourite question. So what was special about Private Wojciech in the Polish army? Was he 5 years old, a bear?
He was a bear, he was a bear, he was a bear.
Do I need to read the last one?
I know this. I know everything to do with bears, and he was a bear, and he used to drink beer. He used to help them lift the big armaments casings.
Can we hear the third option just in case?
He was German, but you seem pretty set on.
He was
think I
a
heard some of that. He was a bear.
Syrian brown bear who was adopted by one of the soldiers, and he used to lift things for them that were too heavy because he saw other people doing it. He was very helpful.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. When you said Wojciech, I thought of the play, and I was like, "This
Me
isn't."
too. I was like, "Oh, he murdered his wife."
Yeah, like this isn't the theatre episode, Millie. Have you got the questions mixed up?
But yes, that is the right answer. Wojciech was a bear, and he was sold as a small cub to some Polish soldiers who had just been released from camps in Russia and were making their way across the land. And Wojciech, please look him up. Look for images. He's the cutest
perfect
thing. Yeah, and basically they enrolled him as a private because they wanted to take him abroad to Italy, and they wouldn't have let him do it unless he was an officer. So obviously their first thought was, let's enroll him. And he didn't get paid, but he did get double rations because he ate quite a lot.
Well, he was a bear.
He was unfortunately quite fond of smoking cigarettes and drinking beer.
But he only smoked the cigarettes if they were lit for some reason. And they said he could tell the difference of if you gave him a cigarette and it wasn't lit, he'd just spit it right out.
This bear was hardcore.
Yeah.
Apparently he brought up the morale of troops and was very friendly to humans.
I would join the army today if there was going to be a bear in my regiment.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, if I could hug a bear.
It's a really wholesome story because when he was demobbed at the end of the war, he went to live in Edinburgh Zoo, where a lot of the ex-troops would come and visit him years later.
Aww.
But that question makes me very happy. And earlier when we were talking about our favourite historical figures, I wanted to say Wojciech. But anyway, do you want to move on to the next one?
Okay, so our next question is, what was the childhood hobby of Peter the Great? Did he play toy soldiers with real people? Did he like to role play as Helen of Troy? Or did he like to torture animals?
You know what? All of them sound quite plausible.
I don't think it's the Helen of Troy one.
I want
but
it to be the Helen of Troy one.
Yeah, imagine Peter the Great dressed in his toga, being carried around by Paris and then, causing a 10-year war.
Oh, I'm the most beautiful woman in the world.
Helen of Troy is so interesting though. Like, I know she's like not real, but she's really interesting in the way people depict her, because there's been a lot of like new kind of feminist reiterations in like kind of that she was like taken from Sparta rather than like the traditional view that she went willingly.
I think it might be play toy soldiers with real people.
Yeah, I feel as if that's something a Russian leader would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of that maniacal power that he would have.
Because I guess anyone could torture animals, but only the guy who is going to be the next king would be able to get people to be toy soldiers and kill them.
Let's go for toy soldiers.
Yeah.
Toy soldiers, correct.
Ooh.
He did play toy soldiers with real people. However, he didn't force them to fight each other, and none of them died. It was just he just had them so that they would like parade around and they would do military drills. And it was more to teach him how to be a military commander as a child.
So we misjudged Peter then.
Peter's guard, it was made up of 100 volunteers, mostly from noble households. Mostly it was the children of nobles. And they eventually graduated to become like a personal guard.
Nice. Oh, now we have the final question. Which of these monuments is the oldest? The Easter Island heads, Stonehenge, or the oldest pyramid in Egypt?
I have no idea.
The pyramids of Egypt were built around the Middle Kingdom, which is around like 3000 BC.
So we're looking at about 5,000 years ago for the pyramids then.
Yeah, but Stonehenge was in, like, I think the Neolithic. So that's a bit later than the pyramids, I want to say.
I remember visiting like an archaeological site in Malta that is round about 5,000 years old, and them saying that it was older than Stonehenge.
What about Easter Island?
I've heard that they were there for a really, really long time before they were discovered.
I think the pyramids are the oldest. I think with the Easter Island, I think just because...
I'd go for pyramids just because kind of there's a lot of migration in Polynesia kind of well into the ADs. And my instinct is that Easter Island might have been settled then.
Pyramids, yes.
So
Yeah, let's go for the pyramids.
Nice. I'll let you know what was the most recent. So you're right, the Easter Island heads were most recent. They were made between 1400 and 1650 AD. And then the next oldest, the oldest known pyramid was built in about 2630 BC. But Stonehenge, they think currently is about 3000 BC.
Okay. So I got my dates mixed up.
It's really interesting, though, that they still have no idea what Stonehenge was built for. It might be for rituals.
Hey, we all know it's aliens.
My
but
favorite.
we're right about Easter Island.
Yeah, but that's something.
Matthew, do you want to say your theory of how the Easter Island heads connect to?
Well, it's not a theory, it's more of a meme. Basically, the heads come out of the islands, and then inside the earth, there's the bodies and the legs of the Easter Island heads, and then their toes point out, and that's Stonehenge.
Wow.
I have seen that meme. Is this the conspiracy round?
Not gonna lie, I lost count of what score you're on.
The answer is not very high.
Yeah.
I think like 4 or 5 at the most.
I should have cheated so that you guys could get easier questions and tell you the answer.
Or you should have just sent us all the answers beforehand, and we could have chosen which ones to get wrong so it wasn't suspicious.
I mean, you didn't do that bad. Final scores, you got 7.
Sorry, please edit that out.
We've got the bonus round though.
Well, it's not finished yet. You've now got a chance to redeem yourselves by getting the 3 bonus points on offer for our conspiracy theory round.
Hey, Matt, do you want to drop me a message at any point?
DMs, please, Matt.
So for this round, we'll be telling you some conspiracy theories, and you have to tell us whether they have been proved to be true or whether they're purely theoretical. So there's some debate about this because Matthew believes a lot of conspiracy theories.
I feel like I'm being called out here.
I mean, when I
And as we're going to see, some of these conspiracies are true.
Basically,
True.
Matt, she's calling you a nut job.
Well, when I first met you, you did try and tell me the earth was flat and birds weren't real.
Birds aren't real.
I don't see the issue
They are
here.
cool.
Yeah, you never know. So here's the first question of the bonus round. Is this conspiracy or is it fact? During Prohibition, the government poisoned alcohol to keep people from drinking it.
That I think was true. I heard somewhere that it was true.
I mean, moonshine itself was poison. The amount of ethanol
Although, fun fact about Prohibition, people think that it didn't work because alcohol kept circulating during the time, but when they surveyed people's drinking habits after the 1920s, they found actually on average, Americans drunk much, much, much less after Prohibition than they did before.
Because the moonshine killed off all the alcoholics.
So in a way, it kind of did work.
I don't think the government did poison. They could barely keep up with all of like the speakeasies and all of the underground alcohol.
I honestly think they did.
My gut feeling is that it's also a conspiracy theory and it's not true.
Although with US government actions in general throughout history, it's always been quite shady until all the documents get leaked, like years and years into the future. So.
I mean, I think Prohibition poisoning would have been leaked by now. I feel as if that's something that would have come out. My gut feeling is that it is just a conspiracy.
So we're going with false?
Okay, let's just do it.
Yeah, let's just go with
Okay,
false.
well, I'll reveal if the answers were right or not at the end, because you have to get every single answer right.
Oh no, we're definitely
Oh,
not
God.
getting this.
There's no way we're getting those extra points. We're too hit
definitely
or
not
Let's
miss.
getting
just
them.
have fun.
Yeah.
That's the real point of the journey. It's not about the destination, but the friends you make along the way. Moving on from the topic of friends you make along the way, the Prime Minister of Australia disappeared in 1967 when he was out swimming. The conspiracy is that he was friends with the Chinese government and that he was spying for them to keep Australia out or their role in Vietnam as limited as possible.
No.
And the
I think that
conspiracy
one's
theory is
false.
that he actually swam to a Chinese submarine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he swam to a submarine and then they took him off to China to live with his co-conspirarators.
I don't
Aren't
think
there
people live
sharks
in
off the
Epic
Australian
Sky.
coast?
Well, not the whole coast. It's quite a big country.
It's an island, isn't it?
Like, how far would they have he would have had to have swim out to hit
Hmm.
a Chinese submarine?
Well, he was known as a very strong swimmer.
Yeah, but like, there's a difference between a very strong swimmer and being able to swim like insane.
Like, people
More than the
swimming the
channel.
channel say how hard it is, and I feel as if that's not that much
Mm.
of a distance.
Also, I
Yeah.
don't think it was likely at any point that Australia was really going to be involved in Vietnam.
Yeah, I think that
Unless
was.
it was dragged in through Allied forces.
But then
The
if the
US
UK didn't go to Vietnam,
And also, how was submarine technology at this time? Like, would China have had submarines?
China have got everything.
So are we saying that it was a conspiracy theory? It's not true. Is that your final
That's
answer?
what we're saying, yeah.
Okay, let's move on
Okay.
to the next one. So our third conspiracy theory is that a stroke rendered United States President Woodrow Wilson incapable of governing, so his wife took over surreptitiously for a year.
I think that's true because he did have quite a lot of strokes. Like, I'm pretty sure he had a few and one actually killed him. So
Yeah.
I feel as if it's not that far-fetched for his wife to maybe have taken on some more presidential duties to make him like not seem weak.
I just wonder if it's true, but like of a different president, like that happened to a different president. But I can't
Yeah,
think
like
of
Roosevelt
Hindley.
had to hide a lot of his disabilities because he had polio. He didn't have, don't think he had strokes, but he was infected with polio. So a lot of the time he couldn't be photographed coming out of the car because then it'd be obvious that he had some sort of AIDS.
Yeah, I think it's common knowledge that he did have quite a few strokes.
Mm.
And if he was in a re-election campaign, then surely he wouldn't want to come off as like weak.
Let's just go for it. We have nothing to lose. We've lost
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah,
yeah, we've definitely
Yeah.
lost anyway.
I mean, I think I'm hoping that another podcast does worse.
So our next conspiracy theory, the CIA tested LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs on Americans in a top secret experiment to study behavior modification.
This
This
is
is
true.
true.
that was
MK
true.
Ultra.
MK Ultra, yeah, it's definitely true.
Yeah,
I have no clue, so but I'm just gonna
I've
trust
seen
you
the
all.
documentary. I know this is true.
yeah.
Okay, locking that one
Okay,
in.
so yeah, that one was really quick.
So the final one is a more modern one, that iPhones are programmed to stop working around the time that new models are announced.
I think this was recently
Yeah.
proven true. Like, I
Yeah.
think there was some stuff leaked that proved that iPhone software was built to break down.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
like
it makes
follow-
sense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how'd you get people to buy new iPhones?
Mm.
So we can go on to revealing the answers.
Oh no.
So
Can we
We
just
did not
skip
do
this
well.
part?
Yeah, this doesn't matter. We know it's wrong.
So going back to the first one, I'm afraid it was actually true that the government poisoned alcohol.
What?
Knew it.
What
So
did they
they-
poison them with?
So basically, between 1926 and 1933, the federal government pushed manufacturers to use stronger poisons to discourage bootleggers from turning their alcohol into moonshine.
Because
And-
much of the alcohol that these bootleggers got their whole hands on was like industrial use alcohol. So they would stick poison into the alcohol so you couldn't use it to drink.
It didn't stop them at all. Bootleggers just kept on creating it, and by the end of Prohibition, I think about 10,000 Americans were killed by the poisoned alcohol.
That's
Wow.
terrible.
But like you hear about this, but then like Americans now think it's really kind of hardcore to drink Smirnoff Ice.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly on to the next conspiracy theory. You got this one correct. It is fake that the Prime Minister of Australia was a Chinese spy who ran away in a submarine.
How
Or-
could that have been true? How
Well,
could that have been
in-
true?
I bet that's
In 1983, Anthony Gray, a British journalist, published a book claiming that he was a spy. The book is very poorly researched. It contains a lot of errors, including a point that you brought up, that submarines couldn't get as close to the coast as he claimed they had because they would just get stuck. And the best part, the most damning piece of evidence, and the part that I find funniest, is that his wife, when asked about it, said, well, he didn't even like Chinese food.
Well, the law is that you
Yeah.
can only spy for a country if you're willing to eat their food.
That's why Russia has such a terrible time recruiting spies.
Exactly.
So, moving on to the third conspiracy, you got this one right. Woodrow Wilson's wife did take over when he suffered a stroke. She claimed she was only acting as a steward, but now historians have analysed Wilson's term in office and confirmed that for well over a year, she was effectively president. So, although we have yet to have an elected female president, we technically did have one for a year.
People just assumed it was him.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't tell the difference.
Not only was she smart enough to be president, she was smart enough to pretend she wasn't at the same time.
Mm.
very clever.
The MK Ultra conspiracy, which you got correct. The US government, the CIA, did test LSD and hallucinogens on people to see what would happen.
But
Then
looking on the
is-
bright side of it, free LSD.
Yeah.
For the final one, I'm afraid this is false so far that iPhones have been slowed down to promote the newer models. While this may come out in the future, at the moment it's still just theoretical.
There isn't enough evidence to actually suggest that Apple are actually slowing down their phones. It's just because phones slow down over time and batteries wear down a bit, and when they update the new phones, it slows them down because they can't handle the new process.
Yeah, that's what you would say.
Yeah.
How much did Apple pay you, Matthew?
Okay,
How
Did they
stop,
get to you?
stop the podcast, Millie, turn it off. They're on to me.
They're listening.
let's cut the
Apple
cameras.
are listening.
They're always listening.
On that note, we'll move on to our next section. So it's the part of the podcast where we have a different performer each week, and this will either be monologue, poetry, or music. And this week we have a very old friend of mine, Charlie Henderson-Howat. She's extremely talented and is currently studying a master's in voice. So she's going to perform 3 poems that all revolve around the theme of time passing and history. So the first poem is Ode, We Are the Music Makers by Arthur O'Shaughnessy. The second one is Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. And the last one is Shakespeare's Sonnet. Excuse me while I Google Roman numerals. Well, it's like when it's like an X and then 2 1s.
Well,
Is it 12?
It's X and 2 1s, it's 7.
Wait,
Wait, no, that's V.
isn't
I'm lying.
V5, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
X and
12.
2
It's
12.
12, sorry.
It's 12, okay.
Good job, ancient historian.
I'm,
Expert on the Romans.
Only Latin speaker.
I'm a Greek historian, I'd like to point out.
Oh,
My
sure.
Yeah, you're a Greek historian now, aren't you?
my specialty is very much within classical Greece. Please don't come for me. Can't we talk about the Parthenon, please?
Okay, so the final poem is going to be Shakespeare's Sonnet 12. And there we go. Take it away, Charlie.
Ode We Are the Music Makers by Arthur O'Shaughnessy.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams, wandering by lone sea breakers and sitting by desolate streams, world losers and world forsakers on whom the pale moon gleams. Yet we are the movers and shakers of the world forever, it seems. With wonderful deathless ditties we build up the world's great cities, and out of a fabulous story we fashion an empire's glory. One man with a dream at pleasure shall go forth and conquer a crown, and three with a new song's measure can trample a kingdom down. We, in the ages lying, in the buried past of the earth, build Nineveh with our sighing, and Babel itself with our mirth, and overthrew them with prophesying to the old and the new world's worth, for each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth.
Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson.
Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labour and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, we passed the setting sun, or rather he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer, my gown, my tippet, only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feel shorter than a day, I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity.
Sonnet 12 by William Shakespeare.
When do I count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night? When I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white. When lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girdled up in sheaths, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard. Then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing 'gainst time's scythe can make defence, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence.
Wow, really enjoyed that.
I really liked her interpretation of Shakespeare's sonnets.
Interested kind of how the choice of poems is really linking into what we've been saying. Time passing, how do we relate to the past? Yeah, really nice to hear.
Nice. So basically, we're not charging any money for this podcast, but we are endorsing a different charity each week. And this one, we're going for a kind of history theme and choosing the National Trust. So this organisation does wonders in the restoration and preservation of old houses. They allow us to protect these beautiful houses so that future generations will be able to visit them too and learn about history like we have. And Chloe mentioned this charity the other day as well. And I think you were saying something specific to coronavirus.
Yeah, obviously with the kind of situation at the moment, the general public can't go and visit these places, but they're still having to be maintained by staff and by the owners of these properties. And without the extra money coming in, it's very imperative that we help all we can, otherwise people won't be able to visit these beautiful places that mean a lot to the country, I think. So I think any donations that people can make would just be a massive help.
Every little helps.
It could honestly be anything.
Yeah,
Right.
We'll make sure we put the links in the description of this podcast, and it's the National Trust, so it's very easy to find online as well. And we're reaching the end of the podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who took part.
And thank you, Matthew, for writing these questions with me.
All of you are such experts in your own field of history.
I really wouldn't say that.
He doesn't even know Roman numerals.
Yeah, we're going to have to cut out the mistakes that Chloe made.
You didn't really give me much time to show my expertise. I did what I could with what I had.
Okay, so I'd also like to take a moment to thank everyone except for Chloe, who
I'd like to say thank you to Millie for having this idea, because it really is a lovely thing.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Millie. I think this is going to really help a lot of people. Matthew. But yeah, thank you to Millie.
If anyone had thanked me, I'd have given you an extra 5 points on your quiz score.
Thank you, Matthew. You have been such a great co-host.
Thank you, David.
This has been the Brightside podcast, created by me, Millie Henson, produced by Layla Elderwish, and co-hosted by Matthew Harper and Rebecca Hughes. This podcast is focused on positivity and the wonderfully weird things our world has to offer. Thank you for listening.